The night was colder than usual, and the city seemed to hold its breath under a heavy blanket of fog. Officer Ryan Hale sat in his car, parked just outside the old riverfront warehouse. The rhythmic hum of the rain against his windshield was the only sound that dared to move in the stillness. His badge lay on the dashboard, gleaming faintly under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. He hadn't worn it in hours. For 20 years, Ryan had been the kind of cop every rookie admired. Steady hands, clean record, always on time. He believed in the law with a kind of naive devotion, the kind that made him turn down bribes, testify against corrupt officers, and work double shifts just to see justice done. But that was before the case. Before the night, everything he believed in was buried under lies and blood. Her name had been Claire, his wife, a social worker who never gave up on people, even the ones everyone else had written off. She was the kind of person who saw light where there was only rot. 3 years ago, she had been murdered in her own home, stabbed 17 times. The case had gone nowhere. The man Ryan was sure had done it, a drug runner named Miguel Soto, had walked free on a technicality. Evidence mishandled, they said. The system had failed him, the way it failed everyone who believed too much in it. For 3 years, Ryan had lived like a ghost. He still wore the uniform, still clocked in, still smiled for the photos at department events. But inside, something had gone dark. Every time he saw Soto smirk, every time he heard him laugh freely in a bar, something inside him burned hotter. Until one night, the law wasn't enough anymore. It started small. A quiet drive to Soto's neighborhood, just to see where he lived. Then nights spent watching, learning his patterns, his habits, the faces that came and went. It was surveillance at first, officially unofficial, but it felt good. It felt like control again. Then one evening, Ryan found Soto behind a convenience store, arguing with a dealer. Words turned to shoves, and Ryan could see the flash of a knife. His hand went to his holster before his mind even caught up. But then he stopped. For the first time in years, he didn't call it in. He just watched. He watched as Soto won the fight, blood on his hands, grinning like a man untouchable. And that was when Ryan knew justice wasn't coming. Not from the courts. Not from the badge. It took another month before he made his move. He planned it like an investigation, methodical, precise. He knew where the cameras didn't reach, where patrols rarely passed, and where a body might not be found for days. He deleted his GPS logs, used burner phones, even wrote up a fake report to give himself an alibi. Years of training turned against the system that had taught him. On the night he chose, the city was drowning in rain. Ryan parked near the docks, the same place he had once proposed to Claire. Soto's car appeared on schedule, headlights slicing through the mist. Ryan stepped out from the shadows, his gun heavy in his hand. Soto's face shifted from surprise to smugness. "Well, well. Officer Hale," he said, voice dripping with mock respect. "You here to arrest me again?" Ryan didn't answer. He walked closer, each step echoing in the puddles. Soto laughed, but it was hollow this time. "What? You think you can scare me, cop? I've been through worse." The first shot cut through his sentence. Then another. And another. Ryan didn't stop until Soto hit the ground, the laughter gone, the rain washing the blood into the cracks of the street. When it was over, Ryan stood there, the gun trembling in his hand. He had expected to feel something, satisfaction, relief, maybe peace. But there was only silence. The sound of the rain, the flicker of lightning, and the hollow realization that nothing had been restored. He had avenged Claire, yes, but in doing so, he had crossed the same line he once swore to protect. He drove home in silence. The badge was still on the dashboard, staring at him like an accusation. He thought about throwing it away, about running, but he didn't. Instead, he polished it. He put it back on his chest the next morning and walked into the precinct as if nothing had changed. For weeks, no one suspected him. The department ruled Soto's death as a gang retaliation. Case closed. Justice served, at least on paper. But the city's silence started to eat at him. He began to see things, Claire's reflection in mirrors, her voice in the rain. Some nights, he'd wake up with his gun in his hand, unsure if he was dreaming or remembering. The guilt came slowly, but when it did, it settled deep. It wasn't the kind that drove him to confess. It was the kind that chained him to his own conscience. He kept showing up to work, shaking hands, smiling in photos, while the memory of that night bled through the edges of his mind like ink in water. A year later, a rookie found the shell casings at the docks, corroded, forgotten, but not lost. Internal Affairs reopened the case. They asked Ryan to sit in on the interviews, never suspecting that the man taking notes was the killer they were hunting. He told himself it didn't matter anymore. That Soto was a murderer, that the system had forced his hand. But deep down, Ryan knew the truth. The night he pulled that trigger, he didn't just kill a criminal, he killed the last honest part of himself. Now, every time he looks at his badge, he sees the reflection of the man he used to be, the man who believed in the law. And every night, when the rain starts to fall, he hears Claire's voice again, soft, broken, asking him why. The city sleeps. The fog rolls in. Somewhere, a siren wails in the distance. And Officer Ryan Hale, the man who once lived by the law, sits alone in the dark, polishing a badge that no longer means a thing. Weeks turned into months, and still, the ghosts would not let Ryan rest. The city seemed to hum with secrets, its neon veins pulsing through the fog, whispering reminders of what he'd done. Every streetlight, every flashing red and blue reflection in a puddle felt like a warning. He'd done what the courts couldn't. He'd taken justice into his own hands. But what had it cost him? He went through the motions. Patrol shifts, paperwork, coffee breaks with officers who joked about the latest scandals, never noticing how his laughter never quite reached his eyes. The department called him a model officer. His captain said he was the kind of man the city needed more of, steady, quiet, dependable. Brian almost laughed at that. At home, the house still smelled faintly of Claire's perfume. He never threw her things away. Her books still lined the shelf, her favorite sweater still draped over the armchair. Sometimes, when the world was quiet, he'd imagine her walking in, smiling that tired smile she always wore after a long day. And then the illusion would break, and he'd remember the blood, the crime scene tape, the hollow condolences. Sleep never came easy. He'd wake at 3 a.m. to the sound of rain, heart pounding, thinking he'd heard her call his name. The mirror across from his bed caught the city lights, casting faint red and blue across his face, colors of guilt, colors of duty. Then came the new case. A body found near the docks, another lowlife, another unsolved killing. Same place where Soto had died. Only this time, the details were too similar. The shell casings. The bullet pattern. The press started calling it the dock murders. Ryan could feel the walls closing in. Detective Carla Monroe was assigned to lead the investigation. Young, ambitious, sharp as broken glass, the kind of cop Ryan once was. She respected him, at first, asked for advice, praised his instincts. But Ryan could see it in her eyes. She was too smart, too observant. She noticed things. The way he hesitated when they visited the scene. The way his voice tightened when she mentioned Soto's name. One night after work, she stopped him outside the station. The rain was falling hard again, the kind that turned the city into a blur of reflections. "Ryan," she said quietly, "can I ask you something off the record?" He nodded, careful, expression unreadable. "You ever get the feeling that justice doesn't always come from the badge?" Her tone was neutral, but her eyes weren't. They were probing, testing. Ryan wanted to lie, to say he still believed in the system, that he still trusted the process. But the words didn't come. He just gave her a long, tired look and said, "Sometimes justice doesn't come at all." She didn't press him that night. But something had shifted. She started watching him more closely, asking subtle questions, checking reports. Ryan knew what that meant. He'd been on enough investigations to recognize the quiet pattern of suspicion. He tried to cover his tracks, altered files, adjusted timestamps, burned old notes. But the truth was like a shadow. No matter how tightly he sealed the cracks, it slipped through. One afternoon, he came home to find his door slightly open. Inside, on the table, lay an envelope. No name. No return address. Inside it, 2 photographs. One of him at the docks the night Soto died. The other, a close-up of his badge, wet with rain and blood. His pulse froze. He scanned the photos, every line, every blur. They weren't from any police file. Whoever had taken them had been there that night, or had found something he missed. A note lay folded beneath the photos. Just one sentence, written in block letters. You were right. The system doesn't work. He burned the note, but it didn't matter. The message was already inside him. He started watching everyone, his colleagues, his neighbors, even Carla. The paranoia gnawed at him. He stopped sleeping altogether. Every time the phone rang, he expected a voice on the other end saying they knew. But weeks passed and nothing happened. No arrest. No confrontation. Just silence. It was worse than exposure. It was the slow torture of waiting for a reckoning that never came. One evening, Ryan sat in his car outside the precinct, engine off, hands trembling on the steering wheel. He thought about turning himself in, ending the lie. But then he remembered Claire, her laughter, her warmth, and the way the courts had shrugged when her killer walked free. Confession wouldn't bring her back. It would only destroy the last piece of her he had left. So he did what he'd always done. He went back to work. But now, every call, every suspect, every case became personal. He started bending the rules again, just slightly at first, planting evidence, nudging confessions, making sure the guilty didn't walk free. His colleagues whispered that Ryan Hale had become ruthless, efficient, maybe even cold. They didn't understand. He wasn't a cop anymore. He was something else. A ghost wearing a badge. Late one night, after closing another case that ended too neatly, Carla walked into his office. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. I know what you did, she said softly. All of it. Ryan didn't move. Didn't speak. The rain outside hit the windows like static. I'm not here to turn you in, she said. I just wanted to see what kind of man crosses that line and keeps pretending he hasn't. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Be careful, Ryan. The system doesn't forgive men like us. After she left, he sat there for a long time, staring at the framed photo of Claire on his desk. Her smile looked different now, distant, almost sad. He picked up his badge, turned it over in his hand. It still gleamed, but it felt heavier than ever. Outside, the sirens wailed again, echoing through the city's sleepless night. Somewhere out there, another case waited. Another wrong to be made right, another name to erase from his nightmares. He holstered his gun, pinned his badge back to his chest, and stepped into the rain. Because for Ryan Hale, justice was no longer about law or order. It was about balance, and the only way to restore it was through blood. And as the city swallowed him once more, the line between hero and killer vanished completely. The rain had become a kind of constant companion, the city's quiet soundtrack to Ryan Hale's unraveling. Every night, it fell harder, heavier, as if trying to wash something away that couldn't be cleaned. He started keeping the police scanner on in his apartment, sometimes all night, sometimes all weekend. He said it was habit, but really it was something else. He was listening for the sound of himself in the static. Months passed. The dock murders faded from the headlines. The department had moved on, but Ryan hadn't. He'd grown sharper, quieter, and somehow more feared. Even the criminals whispered his name differently now. Hale doesn't arrest. Hale ends it. Nobody ever proved anything, but the streets always knew before the paperwork did. He didn't notice how much he'd changed until one morning when he caught his reflection in the mirror at the station. His uniform was pressed, his badge bright, but his eyes were cold. Not angry, not sad, just emptied out. The same eyes he'd seen in perps who'd lost everything long before they picked up a gun. Carla Monroe didn't speak to him anymore. She kept her distance, professionally polite, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. She knew he'd crossed a line, and maybe, deep down, she understood why. Some nights, when they worked late in the precinct, their silence said more than words ever could. Then came the call that shattered the silence again. A body found behind an abandoned motel off Route 16. Another low-level criminal. Execution-style shot. The MO matched too perfectly. But this time, there was something different. Ryan was the first on the scene. The body was slumped against the wall, rain dripping from the roof in slow, steady drops. But it wasn't the blood or the weapon placement that made his chest tighten. It was what was pinned to the corpse's jacket, a police badge. His badge. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. He reached out with a gloved hand and touched the metal. It wasn't his badge, of course. It was a duplicate, one that bore his number, his name, but crudely engraved. Whoever had done this was sending a message. He glanced around the scene, scanning the shadows, the rooftops, the alley mouth. Nothing. Just rain and silence. But he could feel eyes somewhere in the dark. Watching. The next morning, a note appeared in his locker at the precinct. Balance, Ryan. You started this. He didn't report it.
He didn't tell Carla.
He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he started digging. Every unsolved case from the last year, every suspect tied to the docks, every face that might have seen him that night. The more he searched, the clearer it became. Someone out there was copying him. Or avenging him. One evening, he traced a lead to a rundown apartment complex near the East River. The name on the lease stopped him cold. Elias Soto. Miguel Soto's younger brother. Barely 22. Arrest record full of petty crimes, no convictions. Ryan remembered seeing the kid once, years ago, sitting in a courtroom, staring at him with dead, glassy eyes. He broke into the apartment after dark. The place was almost empty. Bare walls, one mattress, a small table, and a corkboard covered in newspaper clippings. Articles about the Dock murders. About him. His name circled in red ink. In the center of the board was a photo of Claire Hale. Smiling. Alive. And beneath it, written in shaky handwriting. You killed my brother. I'll kill your memory. Ryan stood there for a long time, the weight of the gun at his hip pressing like guilt against his ribs. Then he heard the creak of a floorboard behind him. The kid moved fast, too fast. The first shot went wide, cracking the window. Ryan dove for cover, firing once, twice. The silence that followed was deafening. When he stood, Elias was on the floor, bleeding, his pistol still in his hand. The rain outside had started again, whispering against the glass. Ryan knelt beside him, gun trembling. Elias tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasp. You think you made it right, he gasped. You just made more of us. And then he went still. Ryan sat there, staring at the body, feeling the truth of it sink into his bones. For every man he'd killed, there would always be another. The system he'd broken away from wasn't the only thing corrupt. It was the cycle itself. Revenge didn't end. It only changed hands. By the time Carla arrived, the scene was already staged. Ryan told her it was self-defense. The report was clean, believable. But she didn't look convinced. She studied him in that same unreadable silence as before, eyes heavy with something between pity and disgust. Later that night, back at the precinct, Ryan sat alone in the locker room. He took his badge off, placed it in his hand, and stared at it for a long time. The reflection staring back wasn't that of a cop. It was of a man who had become everything he'd once sworn to fight. He thought about Claire, how she believed in him, in the law, in redemption. He wondered what she'd say if she saw him now. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd just turn away. The clock ticked softly. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and went unanswered. Ryan reached for his gun, not out of rage, not fear, but exhaustion. Then he stopped. He holstered it again, slowly, because death would have been too easy. He stood, buttoned his shirt, and walked out into the hallway, the sound of rain following him like a confession. He didn't know where he was going anymore, but he knew one thing: he'd never be free of that night. Not in this life. Maybe not ever. And as he stepped into the storm once more, the city swallowed him up like it always did. One more ghost in blue, haunted by the echoes of justice long dead.